program and MA English programs with full in-state tuition for their first year of study. All applicants to the two programs are considered for these fellowships. There's no additional application needed. All right. And of course, we also want, as I said before, to make mention of the Steinbeck Center itself to, once again, be mindful of the of Martha Heasley Cox's generosity as well as our donors. Also want to give a quick shout out to Daniel Rivers, our director of the Steinbeck Center, and our English department and creative writing program at San Jose State, all of which come together to create the wonderfulness that is the Steinbeck Fellows program. Okay, for our first reader right now will be Annie Vy Trinh. Annie holds an MFA from the University of Kansas and an MA from Mississippi State University. Her fiction has appeared in New Ohio Review, Joyland, Passages North, and several other venues, as well as she has also earned a Pushcart nomination and was selected as a finalist for a Best of the Net Award in nonfiction. She has been supported by Kundiman, VONA, and Key West Literary Seminar. Annie's work centers on the Vietnamese diaspora, and she is completing a short story collection. Annie, you're our first reader. Please please read.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Keenan. I'll be reading an excerpt from my short story, The Language of Melons. The language of melons. We speak the language of melons in our family. It has been something that Mom and Dad spoke to me since I was born. I speak to the melons all the time when I'm buying food with my parents. At Costco, I run to the pile of watermelons and I press my ears against their hard shells, tapping my fingers against them. They answer me in soft baritone tunes, telling me that they're either hollow and broken or ready to be cut and eaten. Or at Sprouts, I go to the cantaloupes, but they're always angry. How dare they put us at the same price as the honeydews, they say in a crescendo. We are worth more than them. And sometimes Dad laughs at my failure to understand winter melons. He grabs them and flicks a finger against their yellow surface. I do the same, tapping until I can make out the words. They speak in dialect, he tells me. Their responses have a higher pitch compared to other melons. How can you tell the difference, I ask. I can only understand watermelon and cantaloupe. You need to speak melon more, Dad says. You're too busy talking to the same fruit. I make sure to practice speaking melon at home, but Mom gets mad at me because it's not helping me with school. Do your homework, she tells me. But homework is hard and I go to the backyard every time I can't do it. In the garden, I dig my feet into the soil, let my toes wiggle with the worms while I listen to the melons chat. I need more water, the new centuries say. I need more nutrients. Oh, be quiet, answer the jade dew. You're under the shade. You'll be okay. I sit with the melons as they sing, chanting together as I try to repeat their mantras in a low voice. And I tell them everything, how I can't understand the words at school, how kids laugh at behind me and whisper. Sometimes the noises scare me, metal screeching and scratching from the ceiling when I try to do my homework. The melons tell me it will get better. We promise it will, they all say in a tune. Don't worry, just have fun for now. I hear Dad's footsteps behind me. He roars and picks me up, kissing my cheeks until I tell him to stop. He puts me down and shows me a new plant that he bought. Dad pulls out a long green fruit. I gag and step away, shaking my head as he brings it closer. Some melons don't look like melons, and bitter melons are one of them. Bitter and disgusting, long and shriveled, like my fingers when I soak too long in the bathtub. That's not a melon, I say. Don't be mean, he holds it close to my ear. A trill responds to me, and I grab the melon, trying to understand its words. I can only understand, hi, I said. I was the same way. Dad takes the bitter melon. You just need to practice. Promise? Yes, Dad says. You'll get better. It's the same for school. Those things take time. I plop down to the dirt and frown. No one talks to me in class. Look, Dad says, it'll get better. Once school's over, we can go visit my hometown in Vietnam. At school, no one speaks Melon. Everyone writes and speaks English. I try to do the work, but I don't understand the words, and writing is harder. I repeat words to myself. It doesn't sound like the song that Mom sings to me before I go to sleep. My voice pops and cracks like machines hammering into rocks. I place my hands over my ears as I glance at the moaning computers, the drilling pencil sharpeners, the squeaking markers. It hurts, and I don't like it. So I grab my pencils, click and clank against the table, forming language with sound, like the melodies that the melons taught me when they sing with the wind. My classmates get angry. They whisper to each other while one gets the teacher, and she takes my hand, telling me to stop. But I answer back with thumps and then sing the words in a high pitch, hoping my personal melon in my backpack will respond in its song. But my teacher frowns and tells me to sit at the bench during recess to think about my actions. I don't want to think, I say. I want to talk melon. I eat my Cheetos beside my melon. I hum the tune of the Crenshaw. What a beautiful sound, the Crenshaw says. Keep singing. You'll master it in no time. But the more I sing, the more my classmates laugh at me. They come to the bench, pointing and giggling as other circles my melon. They take the Crenshaw and run off, kicking my friend until its shell cracks. I don't bring my personal melon to school anymore. It sounds scary when my classmates heard them, like an avalanche of metals dumping into a garbage truck. Instead, I bring baby melons. They're small and fit inside my pocket. Mom tells me not to bring them, but the melons worry about me. The melons cry a soft song every time my classmates make fun of me or hurt me. They hate seeing my bruises, scratches covered with dirt, and sometimes my nose bleeds when I cry. Don't be like them, says the honeydew. They hurt people. But I want to make friends. I don't tell this to the melons because they might get angry. Hey, Melonhead, my classmate teases me, patting my head. Do you want to play with us? I push their hands away and eat my cheese sticks. I'm getting better at speaking English, so I know they're making fun of me. I want to go back home, play in the garden with my cousins, listen to the birds and frogs singing to me instead of cars. I want to move back to the town where my friends speak melon, where we jump into rivers, catching melons that escape from the fields. I don't want to be here anymore. I always tell this to Mom, but she says no. This is our home now. I throw my juice box on the ground. My classmates hold their stomachs, laughing. They leave to play dodgeball, and I step on the box as pink water squirts out from the straw. I wrap my arms around my legs and watch a beetle crawl up my skin. You are never alone, the muskmelons say. They sing with the wind and the leaves rustle, reminding me of the rainstorms in the hot summer. And the melons are right. I'm not alone. I have them. I lie on the dirt, flapping my arms and legs and forth, hoping to make a dirt angel. Above me, Dad smiles and sits next to me. I know why he's here. I didn't do my homework or listen to Mom. I just cried and threw my books and pencils on the floor. But homework is hard, and everyone else learns faster than me. Tonight, after dinner, I won't have any dessert. ice cream with fruit from the gardens until I finish everything. I sit up and tell him I don't want to do it. Let me help you, Dad says. We go back to the kitchen, and I took out my workbook. I pointed to the list of words and then to the directions. Dad frowns as he grabs the dictionary and looks up the words, tracing his fingers down on one page and to the next. Do you get it? I ask. I do, he says, pointing to the directions. I think the assignment wants you to spell out the word 5 times. I throw the pencil. No, that's hard. Be patient, Dad points to my workbook. It's hard for me to learn this too. Really? Yes. Let's learn this together. We do this for hours. I finish one problem while Dad looks up the word. He tells me what it means in English and then makes me shut my eyes, spelling the words out loud. I don't like hearing my voice. It sounds like an animal in trouble. But Dad tells me to write down the words 5 times, spell them out loud 5 times, and then another 5 times with my eyes closed. And I do what he tells me. After a couple of hours, Dad grabs my spelling list, tests me. I cover my eyes, trying to remember the sounds of each word. It doesn't sound like melons, I say. I know, but you get used to it. He points to the words on the page. See? You're getting better. Dad is right. I am getting better. Sometimes when Mom needs help reading words, I read them to her and tell what they mean. Mom even lets me speak to strangers on the phone. She tells me in Melon, and I say back in English. She gives me a hug, telling me to work harder so I can do good at school. But I don't want to. I know some of the words that the teacher is saying now, but my classmates still make fun of me. I go to the desk, and my pencils are missing. My workbook is ripped apart, and I show this to the teacher. She glares at the class, asking, how did this happen? No one answers. They just stare, the bell rings, and I grab my lunchbox. I sit on the benches as I place the baby honeydew beside me. It's so hot in your pocket, she complains. Please put me under your desk. I don't listen because my classmates circle me, kicking my food to the ground and then stepping on it. Then they steal my melon, kick it. Stop, I say, my friend will get hurt. They don't listen and try to pull it away from me, my fingernails clawed into their skin. It hurts, says the honeydew. Tell them to stop. They don't stop, and they hold the baby melon above their heads. They smash it down to the floor. My friend breaks, and I cover my ears, just like when glass is thrown on the road. Broken, can't be fixed. They laugh, pointing at my dead friend. I jump on them, biting into their arms. I wait for my parents after school. I sit at my desk, rolling the pencils back and forth as I try to do my homework. But I'm too scared when Mom and Dad come to take me home. They'll say I can't hang out with the melons anymore or eat fruit salad with tiny pieces of orange honeydew and green cantaloupes. Then the teacher points at the door, and my parents walked in with a person who can also speak melon like them. She tells them what happened at school today, how I was taken to the principal's office and to the nurse to clean my bruises. I hurt the other girls and will have to help with the lunch ladies during break. I lay my head on the table, looking from the calendars of birthdays to the humming of from the ceilings. It's not my fault. They hurt the melons first. I try to say this to them, but Dad slouches as he listens to the translator. Mom asks the translator, what can they do to help me more? Speak English more, and it will be easier for her to communicate, the teacher says to the translator. Dad says that they don't want me to forget how to speak Melon. It's our family language. She still can, my teacher says, but English will help her to be successful. It is what everyone uses. We can put her in ESL class, maybe have her practice in the summer too. Mom nods, but Dad shakes his head. She doesn't know anything, Dad says to Mom, whispering. She will learn, and it takes time. Let's wait and see and what happens. We came here to give her opportunities, Mom says. Let's not take that away. She squeezes Dad's hand. Don't worry, the Millens will still be here. Thank you. So, oh, yes, thank you. That's the excerpt for Language of Millens.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much. All right, next up is going to be Meghana Mysore. Meghana Mysore is from Portland, Oregon. She holds a BA in English from Yale University and an MFA in creative writing from Hollins University. Her writing has been or will be published in the Yale Review, the Rumpus, Indiana Review, Passages North, the Asian American Writers Workshop, Roxane Gay's The Audacity, and the anthology, A World Out of Reach. Mysore is the recipient of fellowships and support from Breadloaf, Tin House, and the Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing, where she won the second place prize in prose in their annual contest. She's at work on a novel exploring loss, desire, and joy in 3 generations of an Indian American family, an excerpt of which is forthcoming from Pleiades. Meghana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? I can just see like a nod. I'm always nervous that I'm inaudible. Okay, cool. So hi, I'm Meghana. Thank you so much, Keenan, for the intro. And it's really a pleasure to be reading tonight with Annie and Amanda. I'll be reading from my novel and stories, tentatively titled A Canopy of Branches. And this novel chronologically follows the lives of 3 members of an Indian American family and considers the question of belonging within the family and also in the outside world. It moves from the 1980s in South India at the beginning of 2 characters, Srinivas and Lakshmi's arranged marriage, to the fictional and the largely white suburb of Blossom Grove, Oregon in 2022. It switches between the perspectives of Lakshmi Srinivas and their American-born daughter, Surya. In the face of repeated personal and professional exclusions, these family members have to ask themselves who they are to rely upon, and they find themselves ultimately pushed more deeply towards each other into their pasts. So this story that I'll read from is called Ink Blot, and it's about a third of the way into the manuscript. And here we find Srinivas visiting his daughter Surya in college, and he hasn't spoken to her in quite some time, and the story charts their reconciliation as they begin to understand a bit more of each other and how they might be similar. So I'm going to read first from the beginning of the story. Ink Blot. Surya started the painting at the lake in the early afternoon on a day when the sun had not yet claimed space for itself in the sky. She wore her gray raincoat, though it was not raining, as a reminder of home and of her mother, whom she had not called in a few weeks, a numbness having settled somewhere deep in her body. A man threw scraps of white bread into the lake, and ducks pecked greedily at the pieces. She painted this image, the long stretch of water and the man on the bench. She watched him in the water, and though she painted what lay in front of her, what she saw was herself at the YMCA in Blossom Grove when she was 5 and first learning to swim. Now, 3 weeks later, it was the middle of April during her senior year of college. For the past several months, Surya had felt vaguely empty, the numbness perhaps catalyzed by her boyfriend breaking up with her in September. She did not want to think she had been so shattered because of a boy. She thought often about the Bechdel test and vowed that she would never be someone who could not pass it. In the past several months, she had returned, she felt, to her uncertain self from the beginning of college. Back then, she had few friends. She had not yet met Lucy, her best friend, or fully succumbed to the joy she felt in making art. Something had shifted in her, and she was regressing to that earlier self. She found it tiring even to respond to Lucy's text messages or to update her in the contents of her life. Surya recently spent a night with a boy she'd met on Tinder, who recited to her a monologue about the symbolism of cats in Murakami's work. She didn't want to invite him to her room, but she also didn't want to be alone with herself, so she let him slosh his tongue around in her mouth. She didn't want to listen to another Velvet Underground song. She was bored of her own regurgitated sadness. She was sitting with Lucy during breakfast in the dining hall, peeling a boiled egg. Her phone dinged and she found an email at the top of her inbox with a subject line, "In town." "Going to be in Boston for work on Friday. Mom told me you had exhibition. Thought I'd come by. Would be nice to see you. Hope you've been okay. Can't believe it's last year. Anyway, looked up information for Williams Art Gallery. Looks nice. We'll be there in afternoon, 12:30 or 1. Okay. You have my phone number. Will be good to see you. Haven't seen you in so long. Okay, good. Love you. See you soon. Dad." Phone number 541-678-9836. She sliced the egg in half and the knife clinked on her plate, revealing a greenish yolk. Questions poked through her mind, bright and urgent. Why did he want to visit her now for the first time? They hadn't truly talked in the past 4 years, except for when Surya was Skyping with her mom and she snuck him into the frame. In the gallery, her dad squinted at the painting of the lake, slanting his head to the right, then to the left. Surya uneasily watched him scrutinizing her paintings. The last time he'd looked at anything she'd made was freshman year of high school, when she had won an honorable mention in an Oregon-wide art contest for a painting of him. Surya recalled how he had walked stealthily through the gallery and later that night sat on the couch with his eyes glued on the TV. When she'd asked him what he thought of the painting, he looked at her, then down at the floor and said in a voice that was softer than Surya had expected, "I didn't know this is how you saw me." "Very good," he said now, nodding at the painting and stepping closer to her. In this movement, he bumped into a man who was holding a plastic glass of red wine and some wine spilled on the floor. "Sorry," her dad said, and the man walked towards the light sculptures, leaving a spot of dark red on the shiny hardwood floor. "Thanks, Dad." He'd shown up on the earlier end of the window in which he said he'd arrive, and Surya felt the oppressive expanse of time still in front of them. In the last year, it had been radio silence, not even a call or text. From what her mother had told her, he'd been extremely busy with work, but she interpreted his silence as him not wanting to know how she was doing. Though she had made it clear that she didn't want to talk to him, his reciprocal coldness still hurt her. Her dad checked his wristwatch, which Surya didn't remember him wearing before. He appeared almost stylish, his blue checkered button-down shirt tucked neatly into his corduroy pants, his hair combed through with gel. "You want to go somewhere to eat?" he asked. "Yeah, maybe 20 minutes. We're just supposed to stick around for a bit to answer people's questions, but yeah, maybe you could just walk around, then I'll meet you at the entrance to the gallery." "That's okay. I can look a bit more at your drawings." "Yeah, of course." He stood in silence, squinting and moving closer to the painting of the lake. He looked small, shorter in stature than she remembered him, his lips sagging permanently into a frown. Lines were knitted into his forehead from all the years of furrowing his eyebrows, and despite his dignified appearance, his eyes seemed heavy, as if they were seeing more than they could bear. She shifted a few steps back, farther from him. On the plane ride to Boston, Srinivas tried unsuccessfully to quiet the voice that pricked at the walls of his mind. The voice told him to just check in at his Homewood Suites, leave Surya a voicemail saying something had come up at work and he could no longer visit, and avoid the embarrassment of seeing his daughter who did not want to interact with him. His thoughts were interrupted by the couple to his right who were annoyingly smooching, their lips like suction cups. He glared at them, but neither of their eyes were focused on him, so his look did nothing to end their noisy affection. He found himself taking out his phone and scrolling through his limited number of photos, one of which was of Surya and Lakshmi under the Hawthorne Bridge, Surya's hair swaying in the wind over her eyes. He smiled at the photo, looking at Surya, then felt the fleeting warm joy turning to apprehension as he imagined her harsh eyes in the gallery looking down at him. From the pictures Lakshmi had shown him of her recently, she seemed to have grown taller, and he assumed she would have now outgrown him. When the plane took off, he felt a jolt in his stomach, then a queasiness. He pushed up the door in the window and watched the plane's wing cutting across the clouds for a while until the image bored him. He shut his eyes, attempting to will sleep into his body, but his thoughts kept itching at the surface of his brain like fingernails on a chalkboard. "It will be good for you," Lakshmi had said before he left, to see her. Srinivas did not believe her, but wanted to. Just, show interest in her drawings, ask about her life, It will be okay. Okay. In the past several months, Srinivas had been trying to move forward on the slow, arduous path towards being okay. He had been forced onto the path when he had to acknowledge in the hospital that he was not okay, which he'd known in the back of his mind since he was around 20. He had tried to bury the bad event as he had buried many other events of his past, but in the stuffy air of the plane, which Srinivas was convinced was even stuffier in the economy section, where Citrix always placed him, he could not put the fresh cut of this memory to sleep. When Surya had left for college, things had been particularly dark. But Srinivas thought he'd been getting better since then, going for runs outside every day and driving from work to the temple to pray. The sharper and unexpected darkness had crept up on him stealthily, gathering within him over the course of several months in small interactions with clients and his boss, and nights of overhearing Lakshmi's conversations with Surya and their laughter, which brought him back to the laughter of his brother and Appa on the porch steps of their house in Bangalore. After the event, he had been instructed by the doctor to attend group therapy sessions every Wednesday, which he dreaded. In the plane, Srinivas pushed the door of the window up and pressed his face against the cold glass. The woman was breathing loudly, her mouth pressed into her lover's shoulder. He closed his eyes and saw Lakshmi on the couch in the days after he returned from the hospital, her frantic eyes. Srinivas held the burden of this secret and the embarrassment of imposing himself on someone who did not want him when he walked into the gallery. The space was too brightly lit and his eyes burned with all the brightness. He was overwhelmed to see his daughter standing there, framed by her drawings and paintings, one of which depicted a blue lake and a man sitting on a bench beside it. The subject of the central drawing was an unrecognizable face dotted in red and orange oil paint. He watched Surya from a distance, irritated by the people moseying around with their wines and plates filled with cheese, wishing that they would just move a little faster and get out of his goddamn way. Surya, though she looked older, had the same far-off look in her eyes that she had had as a young girl. Hesitantly, he walked forward to her. And I'm going to skip forward to the end of the story now. So after the two have had a long dialogue wherein Surya begins to understand some of her own experiences of isolation, as well as of artistry through those of her father. And then here at the story's end, she is standing in the gallery alone after everyone else has left, and she calls her father, who has gone back to the hotel that he's staying in. Surya stood in front of her painting, right at about the distance that her dad had stood, wondering what he had seen. The thought of her dad as a boy, then a teenager, all his artistic potential latent and squashed, with so much to say but unsure of how to say it, pulled at her chest. She thought of him in the garage, tired of his life and wanting to leave it. She wished they could go back into the past and understand each other. She searched in her phone for his name and without thinking, pressed the button to call him. She couldn't remember the last time she'd called him. Hi, Dad. She stared at the blue water in her painting and the man on the bench, scraps of bread in the lake. Surya, it's so late. Why are you calling? He cleared his throat, then resumed his uneven breathing. For the past few minutes, after ending his call about the next day's presentation, he had been staring at the wall in his room in the Homewood Suites. He thought he could see it, Surya's painting, there on the blank wall. He knew she had drawn the lake and a man on the bench, but he saw something else. When she told him to meet her at the entrance in 20 minutes, he'd been unable to move from it. In the painting, there was no one in the water, but as he kept staring, he could see it. Surya during her first swim lesson at the YMCA, afraid to go below the surface to retrieve the yellow diving ring. Come on, Surya, just get it and come right back up. I'll be here, he'd yelled at her from the benches. When she emerged from the water with the ring, she had looked at him and smiled a soft smile, her eyes invisible under her dark blue goggles. You got back to Boston safe? Yes, back in hotel. What are you doing? Watching Jeopardy. Pretty boring. She imagined him on the hotel bed, the blue buzz of the television screen. Can't you switch the channel? I guess. He breathed out a stream of violent air. Are you okay? I was thinking of your painting of lake. Funny. I loved the painting and now I've seen the lake. But very strange, when I looked at the painting, I thought of another time you probably don't remember. Your first swim lesson at Aquatic Center in Blossom Grove. I kept seeing you in the water. She swallowed, and the lump was there again in her throat. That's what I saw too when I was making it. Really? Yeah, I'm looking at it now. She moved slightly and the floor creaked under her. She looked around and the gallery darkly glowed, emptied of people. Surya had felt so alone for such a long time. And here in the vacant gallery, she could finally admit this to herself. Like her dad, she often didn't know how to communicate with the people around her, but she hadn't had to tell her dad what she felt. He understood. He had felt it too. Was she to become him, the person she had run away from? She didn't know, but she knew that if they stayed like this on the phone, they would be sheltered together, however briefly and imperfectly, safe in some unseen pocket of the world. You were so afraid of diving in that day. I was so nervous before every single swim meet. Don't know how I did so many. You liked being in the water. It made me feel better to know you were there. Surya closed her eyes and she felt it, the water enveloping her, clogging her ears so she couldn't hear, and all she could see was shimmering blue. The first few times I tried to flip turn, I hit my head against the wall. But you got it eventually. It's been so long since I swam. She waded deeper into the swirling blue water and felt it moving, and herself going underneath, retrieving the diving ring, coming back up and seeing him there, nodding. She put the phone on speaker and set it down on the floor and began to move her arms in a circular motion, swimming freestyle in the air. Still there is time, he said. She moved in the water, slowly then quicker, afraid until she wasn't, knowing for once what she wanted, to draw the family younger, when they were light and untethered and did not know who they were going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghana. That's both readings, both Annie's reading and Meghana's reading, both wonderful, wonderful readings. And in a moment, we will move on to our third and final reading. But first, I want to remind everybody that if you have questions, we're going to have a brief Q&A after our third reader. And if you would like to ask questions, if you're in the audience in person right now, start formulating your questions. If you are online, please place your questions in the chat and we'll go from there. So, all right. Our third reader is Amanda Mei Kim. Amanda Mei Kim writes about the ways that cultural power, resistance, nature, and capitalism weave through the lives of rural Californians of color. This year, and we're really happy to announce this year, very recently, her essay, Vernon on the Water, was recognized in the notable category in Best American Essays. And last year, she was nominated for a Pushcart Prize by Brick Literary Journal. In 2022, she was the recipient of the Marion Weber Healing Arts Fellowship and the California Arts Council Emerging Artist Fellowship. She has completed residencies at Mesa Refuge, Yefe Nof, Hedgebrook, and the Fine Arts Work Center. Her work has appeared in Brick, LitHub, PANK, and Non-White and Woman, an anthology of BIPOC women writers. She is writing a memoir about her family's 4 generations in agriculture and how racism simultaneously harms people and the environment. Amanda.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with everybody. Thank you, Meghana and Annie, for outstanding readings. I still have a little bit of an emotional knot from that. And thanks to Keenan, Tim, Janice, Noel, for being such wonderful hosts. I'm going to be reading from someone's helping me. I'm going to be reading from a multimedia piece. And this piece includes music by Paul Robeson, as well as photographs by Wakaji Matsumoto. So this piece is actually based on a family photo that's been traveling with my family. Whoa. Hello, preview. Thank you. So this piece is based on a photo that has been traveling with my family for over 100 years, and every part of my family has this photo. And I just a couple of weeks ago discovered that it is hanging right now in the Japanese American National Museum in their online exhibition. You can go and check it out now. And they have an event coming up on December 10th. And so that was a great coincidence. So the piece is called Dear Sosabo. Dear Sosabo, let me begin with an apology. I didn't know what to call you. I had to look it up in a Japanese English dictionary. Sosabo. I'm sure I've never heard this word before. I would have remembered its rhythm like the chorus of a children's song. Sosabo. Why didn't I know this word? Perhaps we are too American and fooling ourselves when we think we have cultural pride, when we dance at a bon or celebrate Oshogatsu or light incense on family shrines. Maybe there's something else we're missing, closer to our core, everyday things like the word for great-grandmother. When you came to this country in 1914, your destination was Beikoku, the abundant country, land of opportunity, prosperity, and safety. That's where you thought you were going. You came with hijiji, another new word that dissolves in my mouth like a butter cookie with a dab of raspberry jam. According to my mother, who never met him, he must have been ugly. This is so typical of her. Her mind often goes to a bad place, a judgmental place, especially when she's talking about one of her own. In the one photograph I have of you and Hijiji, the only part of his face I can see is his arched nose sticking out of the shadow of his hat. You are in Norwalk, California, in the potato field you could not have owned because it was against the law for you to own land. To your right are 5 daughters. The oldest, my bachan, looks about 10 years old, and the youngest looks like she's 4 or 5. Judging by their similar heights, the first 4 girls were born a year or less apart from each other. To your left is Hijiji, your husband, holding an enormous baby boy. What a relief the birth of that boy must have been for you. Someone to carry the family name, because your first one, the one missing from this portrait, could not. You're all standing in a row, careful not to step on the plants around your ankles. It must have been early summer, and it looks like you, your husband, and all those little girls did a good job getting the fields planted. For the next few months, you will sew the simple dress that each of the girls will eventually wear. Fix the leaks in the shack, which can barely hold the 8 of you. Move the outhouse, excavate the night soil, build stacks and stacks of boxes, and repair the barn, which is more important than the shack because it has to keep out the moisture and the mold spore that can destroy a year's work while you sleep. In September, you will follow Hijiji and the horse's plow as it carves deep furrows into the soil, which you and the girls will break apart to dig the potatoes out by hand. You had to produce this boy because Hijiji wanted to own a farm and needed a native-born child, preferably a son, to hold the deed. During the months and years you spent growing and carrying babies, did you think about the one you already had, the boy you left behind in Japan with your first husband, or had you learned to silence those thoughts? These are personal questions, the kinds of questions we would never ask each other, but I can't help it. I want to know, how did you, a young, poor, undereducated Japanese woman, overturn all the power in your world? You were not a rebel when you left your abusive first husband and returned to your parents' house, but you were strong. People shunned you as a bad wife and a bad mother. Your toddler would slip out of the house and wander around the village looking for you. And when you saw him, you would lead him back to his father's home. You were able to bend the rules once by leaving your husband, but you could not break them. The baby belonged to his father. You remarried, probably not an ugly man as my mother thought, but more likely an older man, and went to Beikoku where you had 5 daughters and 1 more son. Hijiji never made enough money to buy that land, and the family returned to Japan in the early 1930s. Soon after, in quick succession, your 3 oldest daughters came of age and married Nisei farmers who took matchmaking trips to Japan to meet their future wives. The 3 oldest sisters would return to the California fields as newlyweds and soon to be mothers themselves. When your youngest son turned 14, you and Hijiji guessed correctly that Japan would lower the conscription age, and you sent the boy to Beikoku to be with his sisters. A year later, your California children and their families were forced into a concentration camp in Poston, Arizona, then another in Tule Lake, California, and you would never see them again. Where do I find you in this country? The potato fields are long gone, and my bachan had no keepsakes or hand-me-downs, no pearl ring or embroidered handkerchief to give me. I have only this photo and the vague, haunting sense that I exist because you refuse to accept violence as part of your lot. When the matchmaker handed Hijiji your photo and told him you had been married before, what did he see? Was he drawn to your stoic expression or your strong back? Did he see what I see, the physical and moral rectitude that could hold a family up? What caused him to feel a murmur of care for a tired woman in a black and white photograph? Your circumstances do not fill me with feminist pride, but rather with a disquieting sense of all that you surrendered, your child, your dignity, your place, not for a piece of this country or a dream, but for your life and therefore ours. My bachan, who always thought of herself as the eldest, will not see her 2 youngest sisters until the 1970s, when they returned to California for a reunion. The 5 women, all in their 50s and 60s, still called each other by their baby names. One of them carried a surprise in her handbag, a photograph of their oldest half-brother. It was the kind of news that doesn't get shared in a letter. By then, you and Hijiji had already passed on, but you had survived the war and the atomic bomb, and all your children survived too, all 7. I didn't know any of this until 2 weeks ago. I was talking to my 84-year-old mother, and she mentioned it to me the same way she might have told me that a light bulb was out. Oh, I should have told you, your grandmother, my grandmother, your bachan's mother, left an abusive husband and abandoned a child in Japan. Really? I asked. He must have been so awful for her to do something like that. Oh, yes. Worse than Uncle Oda, even. What did Oda do?
May I have your attention, please? The library will close to the public in 15 minutes. You check out all your materials now. After 8, the library will only be available to assist you sparks with current tower cards until 12 a.m. Again, the library will close to the public in 15 minutes.
One more time. What did Oda do? My mother asked. He yelled at Auntie every day. He treated her like a servant. Is that abuse? My mother asked. Yes, of course it is. Well, I guess they were all abusive then, she said. I'm not sure why a year into the pandemic, my mother decided to share this particular family secret. I think she was tired of carrying it alone. Sosabo, we almost forgot you completely. You and Hijiji planted us in this country, but we act as if we sprouted here like native poppies, unburdened by your loss and labor. I wrap myself in a happy coat, place a mon over my fireplace, and imagine that I am connected to my past, when really I don't even know your names. 5 years ago, I visited the Hiroshima neighborhood where your daughter lived for many years in a house on top of a 20-foot stone foundation that had miraculously survived the bomb, and where my cousin still lived. From there, we toured the city, meeting more and more relatives, until we had a caravan that included babies and old people, teenagers on bicycles, and a white-faced golden retriever in a diaper. In their faces, I saw versions of my aunts and uncles, but in their voices, their lightness, they were nothing like us, the American side. Rushing around the city, we accidentally passed it by a toll booth without paying. I gasped. My cousin whispered, "Daijobu," to comfort me. He started singing an American song that the sisters had brought back with them when they were young. Amid all the confusing stories and songs, someone probably told me about the half-brother, but I didn't understand. I might have even met his children somewhere in that parade, as new contingents joined whenever we went. In every house we visited, placed high near the ceiling, was the same photograph of you, Ijiji, and your American children in the potato field. They could have chosen a photo from a reunion, wedding, or anniversary, but they knew the art of remembering and chose the image that showed your sojourn and sacrifice so perfectly. When I returned from the trip, I looked up their old songs and found a video of Paul Robeson. Where are the hearts, once so happy and so free, the children so dear that I held upon my knee? Gone to the shore where my soul has longed to go. I hear their voices singing, poor old Joe. I remembered how my cousin looked at me, his newfound relative, as he sang his mother's song. He didn't understand the words, but she did, and this was her lullaby for her post-bomb babies. They're nothing like us, I told my mother, describing our cheerful relatives who ran through the red lights with dogs hanging out car windows. Without a pause, she said, "Well, I guess they must have had it easier than us." Really? I asked. How is that possible? They showed me a spot where school children stayed alive by jumping into the river and clinging onto dead bodies. I don't know, she said. Maybe you misunderstood. From our forgetful American shore, we couldn't understand their happiness, their songs and spontaneity. Over the years, they had managed to reconcile with their pain while we were still holding ours in silence. I may never learn the art of remembering, but I will not forget that we are held together by these simple words, Sosobo, Hijiji, and Himago, great-grandchild, and that we are still circling towards safety together. Sosobo, we haven't arrived in Beikoku, not yet. You're Himago. I'm going to do a really quick musical thing.
Why do I weep when my heart should feel no pain? Why do I sigh that my friends come not again? Grieving for forms now departed long ago, I hear their gentle voices calling, poor old Joe.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. 1 second as we, how do I get out? Okay. You stop sharing? Yeah. Oh, stop share. Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, I'll just bring this back up. Okay, so great. Thank you, Amanda, and to all three of our readers, Annie, Meghana, and Amanda. At this point, I invite anybody in our in-person audience or online to ask the writers a question if you have one. You can either ask one of the writers or all three of the writers a question. We want to open the floor for a brief Q&A at this point. So if you write in to the chat your question, we can answer, the writers can field those questions, and our cast of thousands here, if y'all have any questions.
Something, Amanda, I guess when you're researching your family history, were there any dead ends or brick walls, and how did you sort of there maybe just wasn't information about something, or maybe there were people had different memories of an event? How did you, I suppose, reconstruct from you know, even if there wasn't a lot of material about a certain memory, how did you, what was your process, I guess, for reconstructing things that were nearly forgotten?
Thank you for that question. So can people in the chat hear that question?
You might like repeat. The gist
Okay.
of it.
So we have a guest in the audience who asked how I worked to reconstruct a sense of memory and history. And I would say that I did hit a lot of, he wanted to know if I hit dead ends, and I did hit dead ends. And so in those cases where I didn't have the answer, I relied really on the feeling that I had inherited through either the hesitance around telling these stories, maybe a sense of shame, the silence, of course, around my great grandmother's story, which had been hidden for a long time, and kind of pulled from that emotional well. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, and anybody else with questions? I see one question in the chat, so I'll go to that now. And this question actually comes from one of our Steinbeck Fellows, Bobuk Syed. For all of tonight's readers, what is a craft question you find yourself grappling with in your writing recently? So I'm going to first put this to our fellows who are online, Annie and Meghana. Again, for all of tonight's readers, what is a craft question you find yourself grappling with in your writing recently? Maybe could go first to you, Annie.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. Thank you for that question, Bobak. I think one craft question I've been grappling with is how to express trauma respectfully and honestly, as well in a way that that completes the story too. And I think like when I was doing Language Melons, that was a difficulty right there. How do you explain violence through language, especially when it comes to sound? And so that journey was difficult because did I want to go in a speculative manner or a realist manner? And that took years to write it and to think about it. And therefore I went to more speculative because portraying language in a sound that's similar to nature was, I thought, the best way, at least for the Vietnamese language. So.
All right, and Meghana.
Yeah, thank you, Bobak. That's a great question, and kind of not unrelated to what Annie's talking about with trauma. I think I also am thinking about how to render trauma in my work, where one of the effects of trauma for my characters is that they are stuck in the past, that they are enveloped by their memories and can't fully exist in their present worlds. And so how do you depict that on the page when fiction in some ways like necessarily has to have a sort of engine, has to have a movement? And I feel like that's a question I've been grappling with for a while, like this relationship between the past and the present of a story. So like thinking about what happened to this character in the past, but then how does it affect what they do in the present? And thinking about like what is it, what constitutes an action, what constitutes something that's done in the present, and what's enough. And I found that, yeah, even small sort of actions can be enough to me, but it's about the way that you depict them and kind of like what they reveal about the character. But yeah, that question of how to have an engine for the story, how to make it interesting while also like staying true to the characters and that they are resorting to memory for some reason, and that's because they can't fully exist in their lives at the moment.
Yeah, Amanda.
Thanks so much. Such a good question, Babak. Nice to see you. So what I'm grappling with right now is writing about the past and the present. And understanding that in the past, people had a very different worldview and mindset, and trying to be careful around not applying my own ideas around, for example, power and resistance, and today's frame, which is very political. When I really suspect that our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents really contested with something that was much more moral, that was fundamentally more about their humanity than a political context. And so how do we convey that? And also to find the richness of the past. I think when we look back on the past, especially as people of color, we see a racist past, but I think we're somehow missing the joy that people experienced in their lives, the things that they valued, that they were good at. And so I want to always keep that in the front of my mind, even though I don't know the answers. Thanks.
I have a question for all three people, but I figured, well, Amanda's not, I can start with you. But I have a question about influences, and in general, obviously, the folks that you read and that shape your styles and your craft. But I was also interested in what you're reading that's shaping your current project. Because I know when Amanda was speaking about your work, the first person that came immediately to my mind was Hisei Yamamoto's and 17 Syllables, because that's such, that work basically influenced what I do now as an Asian Americanist scholar. And it was just so powerful to me. But I was thinking about how, especially for someone interested in gender and the perspectives, that gives a Nisei perspective, not an Issei perspective, but it's I find that that's a really strong, powerful, what I would call feminist message. And I'm just wondering if you found her work, or what work or what texts are helping you in your current project. And that's and after you, the folks online could answer that too.
So the question is, what texts have influenced the current project? I'm going to do a really big condensation of a big question. And so, I think our audience member raised an important note that it's hard if you're writing new stories to find lodestones to kind of light your path, and how important that is. And so who influences your work? I will say that Asian American writers often influence my work. My contemporaries really strongly influence my work, because I feel like we push each other to be better writers and we support each other. Earlier though, Michael Ondaatje, who writes from a frame of colonialism and writes beautifully, and who actually is a publisher of who brought this around, which is where I got my first publication in Brick. And so that's my response. And then I'll kick it over to Meghana.
Yeah, great question. And it's constantly changing in terms of what my influences are, but I feel like, like a professor in college said, to sort of create, whether literal or metaphorical, kind of a shelf of books of authors who you can carry with you through time and through experiences, knowing that will change, but who are kind of there to remind you why it is that you even write, like why do you even go to the page. And for me, two of those authors have been Sue Vuncombe, the Mavangsa. She wrote this story collection, How to Pronounce Knife, and is also a Canadian Vietnamese poet. And I just find the sort of simplicity of her language in exploring these relationships of the diaspora and of mother-son relationships, of father-daughter relationships, to be just really powerful. Like there's a depth of emotion, and yet that her language sort of just feels almost like bare, is really powerful to me. And so I think her work, and then also Yoon Lee, has always been a big influence for me, and just her essays and also her fiction. She has this essay called To Speak is to Blunder, and I'm just really interested in the question she talks about there of translating emotions in different languages. And for my novel and stories, the question of language is also kind of prominent in terms of what can the characters convey in their native language, Kannada, versus in English, and what sort of potency of emotion can come through in that native language versus in English. So yeah, those are two influences for sure.
And Annie, if you could also tell us about influences.
Yes, that's a great question. And I guess I have two for sure. The first one is Monique Trung. She wrote the Book of Salt, which really influenced me because how she explores relationship, religion with family members, and how it affects them for different generations too. And especially she was the writer who taught me how to use metaphors with food also, and which I do a lot with my own work. And the second one is Samantha Hunt. Her short story collection, The Dark Dark, was definitely influential. How she explored women's bodies and how she would mix reality with surrealism. And it's something that took a lot, for sure, when it came to my speculative work.
All right, thank you. And we have a couple more questions in the chat. So I'm gonna, at this point, say that these will be the last two questions for our fellows. The first, it comes from Monica Gupta. Apologies if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Another question for all of tonight's readers. What is the big shift in your manuscript that has come through revisions that surprised and or really helped you, whether it's structure, point of view, etc.? Meghana, can I go to you first? And the question is in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, also a great question. And for me, I think something that's happened in the last like 6 or 7 months or so has been that I have really expanded the novel and stories more into the perspective of sort of tertiary or like peripheral characters. And I found that those characters serve as sort of mirrors for these 3 central family members. And I had felt initially that I wanted to really concentrate on them, of course, like going into some of the characters around them, but being able to move myself more into the perspectives of you know, their childhood friends who are in some way significant to them, or like Surya's grandmother, like getting into these perspectives that in some ways also feel unfamiliar to me and difficult and challenging to write, has sort of stretched the perspective of the novel and stories and made it feel more like a collective. And I realized that that is also an important part of this story, is that it is about a family, but it's also about the Indian American community that they live in. And it's about questions of community and where is that community ruptured, and also like where can it still exist and be repaired. And so that these people, this family, are not just individuals, but that they're part of a larger whole. And so I think moving into those other perspectives was important for me to realize that about the project.
Yeah, and Annie, if you could.
Yes, that's a great question. And I think something that was surprising when I was revising my short story collection is structure a little bit more. Usually it's more linear, but now because I'm playing with more of language, the form has definitely become more experimental. So for example, sometimes there are vignettes or maybe forms of like lab reports too. And I think that's really surprising because it has definitely helped my stories to be, how would I say, it really helps to expand the stories more, but also interrogate maybe some systems of power and structure that are, let's say, in the areas of science, or same thing with language. But at the same time, it kind of made me realize that how the characters are experienced trauma too in very different ways. Some are more outspoken about, while others are more writing it or seeing it through like in the means of, let's say, a diary or journal. So it really has opened my eyes to that for sure.
All right, and Amanda.
Thank you. Good question. I think my challenge that's come through in the revision is how to braid together more and more themes. So I'm working on a memoir that really uses a hybrid essay format. And I started off with 2 threads, but now I'm up to 4, and that's as many as I can manage. So
and actually, just stay up there because our last question is also for you.
Okay, so a question for Amanda. The introduction of Paul Robeson's song in the reading was genius, thank you, as it gave you a way to not only include the power of song and his story, but also the historical context. My question is, are you thinking about how to include this in a text revision for when you don't have the opportunity to present in public? I think for anyone who hasn't heard Paul Robeson's voice, It's such a deeply resonant, kind of chamber of excellence, just a beautiful singing voice, and it's full of emotion and power that, I don't think there's anything that can compare to it in any literary form. You have to sit with it and listen to it. And I discovered that not everyone had heard Paul Robeson's voice. And so that's why I started to include that in this reading. Thank you.
All right. So I want to thank once again all three of our fellows who read this evening: Annie Vy Trinh, Meghana Mysore, and Mei Kim. It's also very important that we thank our staff here at the Steinbeck Center tonight, who've brought this gathering to be: Janice Zelaya and Tim Setch, and as well as Andrew McClure. So also in attendance, we have Ryan Smith, MFA student, and our chair of our English program, Noelle Breda Williams. So yeah, big ups to you guys too. You're here. So, all right, it's been real, to speak is to blunder, and it is wonderful to once again bring the Steinbeck Fellows to everybody, to our campus, both virtually and in person. We're looking forward to our spring Steinbeck Fellows reading, date to be determined, to be announced, and that will feature Rena Shaw, Bobuk Syed, and Vivian Ewing. All right, so from the English department and San Jose State University, we wish y'all a good evening. Peace.